I think that's another sort of maybe mistake from innovators, that they're trying to do too much on their own and add unnecessary pieces of complexification and risk, and like just focus what is your core innovation, where you really are good at, where is your IP, and all the rest you find partner for feedstock, find partner for downstream product, find partner for the EPC, find partner for your piloting. And all these partners, they're tough to find and they're tough to vet. In a way, we are an accelerator for partnership. We help companies finding the right partners, and we de-risk this partnership relationship, which is tricky. How do we build trust between human beings, and then having a framework to identify partnership goals? What we try to bring is that partnership element to scaling hard tech. Not one company can do it alone.
Well, welcome back to the Decarb Connect podcast. And finally, after many changes in date, mostly led by me, I'm very pleased to be welcoming Fred Clerc to join me as my guest today. And Fred and I, we first met at, I think it was our Houston event. And at that time, you were the Director of Carbon to Value the Initiatives for the Urban Future Lab. Now you are also Interim Managing Director. So we are very fortunate to have you here. And I think this is a really great opportunity for two things. One, a nice little addition to our mini series on emerging technologies and how we scale them. And two, just sort of really interesting opportunity to dig in later in the conversation to carbon to value in particular. So great to have you here, Fred. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to kick off with my classic opening question, which is just to understand from you, both personally as well as professionally, how have you come to this point in time? How is it that Fred Clerc has found himself living in Brooklyn and working on decarbonisation with this real particular focus on very early stage technology? How did that come together?
Yeah, no, it's and I would say, a lot of people in our sort of decarbonization space have their own sort of journey. So it's an interesting one. I started my career as a computer science engineer, and started in actually a startup in London, and opened the Paris office, and we IPO'd, and then went to management consulting, working for a very large corporates. And after a while, it was in 2009, at the time of the Copenhagen climate negotiation, I just became aware of like the climate risk, essentially, through the IPCC report, and really felt like working for the status quo was just not enough. And we had this incredible, scary, and like risky climate change coming up, and at the same time we had to just change the whole energy system, which was exciting, right? And I wanted to be part of that change. And so after I think I had to think about 3 months, and then I decided I'm gonna quit my job, well paid, with like a nice career, having a good life in Paris and everything. Just going back to university and learn the basic, right? Like chemical engineering for me was like mass and energy flow and transfer, and it was what the problem was about. It was about how we're gonna change the way we produce and use energy. So really wanted to learn back the basics, and after that master in Montreal at Polytechnique Montreal, I worked in the biorefinery space. So I really entered sort of the industrial decarbonization angle from like biomass and waste biomass angle, and how to use waste biomass as a feedstock as opposed to oil and gas for any kind of fuels and chemicals and materials. So I worked with the largest pulp producer in the world for pulp and paper, Suzano in Brazil. And I worked with Neste, the largest SAF producer in the world, which is a small Finnish oil refiner that is excellent case study for like transformation. You should invite them on your show. I did a very large project where assets, the opportunity for diversification using biomass and the different technologies and the techno-economics, and then how you market this new product, how you enter the product with a bio-based product into an existing value chain. So really that was kind of my fundamental experience into climate tech, and then moved to Boston and found this job in New York, and now work for the Urban Future Lab, and I'm sure we'll go deeper into what we do at UFL.
Yeah, well, UFL I first came across with Pat Sapensley, who I know has since moved on, but I think she was one of our earliest guests actually on the podcast. So let's talk about that. Tell us a little bit about what the UFL is and does, and where you are at right now. Because obviously it's been developing over time. So it'd be interesting to understand where you're at this kind of point in summer 2024.
Yeah, I mean, the Urban Future Lab, we are the longest running climate tech incubator in New York. We are part of NYU, and I'll talk a little bit about why this is important. But basically, our mission for the Urban Future Lab is to support innovator scaling climate solutions. So typically, we work from pre-seed to Series A companies in all the different climate tech sectors. Historically, you can think about New York City, a lot of building, a lot of transportation emissions. So it was mostly built environment and mobility. But over time, we have diversified, and we're now looking at carbon to value, hydrogen programs. And so every year we work on average with about 40 companies. And over the last 15 years, we worked with 170 companies. It's not a lot. It's not like a volume approach. It's more of a quality approach. And these companies, they have raised $2.5 billion on the capital markets and have a survival rate of 85%. So there's something we must be doing right. Of course, it's the entrepreneurs that do the heavy lifting, but we like to think that we play a role. We are very hands-on with the companies. It's just not just about the space. We do have some spaces downtown Brooklyn that we offer to the companies, but it's also all our support that we provide to the companies. And
what does it mean when you say we're quite hands-on? I mean, I get that part of your process is tight selection of who actually comes into the cohorts, but what does that mean in comparison to perhaps how the general accelerator world might work?
Yeah, we have full-time employees that have startup experience that work with the companies. They put together like a development milestone program, so that every 6 months we are able to reevaluate what are the priorities of the startups and how we can help. We usually help with like fundraising, investor connections, customer and pilot, being able to get these companies some pilot opportunities. With a lot of regulators, right? Regulation and policy is a huge driver in scaling climate tech. So we have a lot of contacts at the city level, at the state level. It's really a New York. We help with the New York ecosystem. So for any company who is based in New York who wants to enter the New York market, which is a huge market, it's the 10th largest economy in the world. Huge financial services, capital, obviously, very large port, very large manufacturing and ag sectors, huge demand center, 20 million, New York basically consumers, and the most aggressive net zero target. So New York is a great place actually to scale climate tech, and so that's what we specialized in at the Urban Future Lab.
And then when you think about the kind of journey the whole organization's been on in the last couple of years, what have been some of the, I don't know whether it's learnings or kind of key stages you've been through?
Yeah. And just before we go there, like also something that sets us apart is being part of NYU, right? The New York University, and New York University has a sustainability engineering initiative, which is all about connecting researchers with innovators, and help develop new solutions. So there is different sort of verticals around mitigation, remediation, adaptation, and we can tap into the different research areas that startups are working with and do joint grant, applying to joint grants, access to wet labs. So there is a lot of synergies and opportunities to be part of the New York University. I mean, one thing that, in terms of where we are right now, what's really interesting is that we have seen companies that are scaling business model innovation. So taking a mature technology like lithium ion energy storage. And so how do you scale lithium ion energy storage to applications like, local grid relief, like, 5 to 10 megawatt projects that helps to stabilize the grid when there are a huge peak of demand. The technology is not complicated. You put together battery packs. The question is, how do you monetize, the fact that you relieve the grid in some part of the day? How do you get value from that? And that's a company, for example, 9 Dot Energy is a company that does that. They have raised over $400 million so far, including $225 million in project finance. And this company, they joined UFL with, 2 co-founders. Now they are like 80 people. And this is a huge success story in terms of like business model innovation. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we see the need for like hardware, super innovative on the science and engineering sides of companies. So an example of that would be Air Company. Again, joined UFL with 2 co-founders, now over 50 people, close to 200. And they do, CO2 and hydrogen to methanol, ethanol, and paraffins that can then be converted into jet fuel. And they have also raised quite a bit of capital. They raised a Series A and now raising even more and planning. They have a pilot plant and planning a bigger scale in upstate New York. So what's the evolution, if you will, from like focusing on the built environment, which is core to New York, 75% of emissions, and then diversifying into areas like carbon to value and hydrogen, is an interesting play for the Urban Future Lab. And we also have a huge offshore wind innovation hub that we run with some industrial partner, including Equinor, because offshore wind, for New York State is part of the decarb strategy. They have several gigawatt plans. So it's really having different verticals where we specialize, and then having our incubator where we can have all the companies and see all the companies.
Well, we're going to come back a little later in the conversation just to get some thoughts, particularly on the carbon to value cohort and some of the other perspectives you've gained from the work at Urban Future Labs. But I wanted to dive into a couple of questions which are really about, I suppose, the next phase on from the work that UFL does, which is how do we scale the technologies, particularly the hard tech company, technologies that we really need in industrial decarbonisation. As certainly from Decarb Connect's perspective, I would say there have been a few common strands of conversations over the last 15 months in particular. And the one that keeps coming up and really feels increasingly urgent in a way is for industrials who want to decarbonize. It's no longer enough just to know, oh, there's great tech we can pilot. Now they're like, how's this great tech we've been piloting going to get to a phase and a stage where we can be sure we can actually roll it out over multiple assets and for it to really be at scale, at true scale. So a lot of discussion around that at the moment. So I guess my first question to you is, there's a lot in the media, a lot in the trade press and amongst investors as well, talking that there are barriers to major scale for some of the hard tech companies in the decarb space. I'm curious to know, what do you, from where you sit in the kind of with a lot of the earlier stage companies, which of those barriers feel really real? And where are you seeing some more positive momentum? Like, where are you seeing the flow of capital improving? Or, yeah, let's start with that.
Yeah, I think the barriers are very real. And I think the demonstration scale just before the first of a kind commercial project is like one of the hardest nut to crack, because yes, you do have a valley of days from lab to pilot, but you can raise VC money for this. It's feasible. But then when you talk about a demonstration scale, $50 to $100 million project, that kind of capital feels like a lot of money for a lot of risk. And there is, by design, there is no one who wants to take that kind of risk. So I think that is the core of the problem. There are different, hopefully there are different solutions to it. One is that we are seeing that is a trend is a bit more concessionary capital and philanthropic capital. I think there is a lot of interest from breakthrough energy and builders vision, a prime coalition that have now a new fund, Trellis, that is looking at what is the role of philanthropy to scale, to fill that gap, recognizing that this level of risk is very uncomfortable for just one funder. You obviously have now, government funding. In the US, DOE has a new fund called OSED, the Office for Clean Energy Demonstration, which is really addressing that very uncomfortable scale. So it's good news. It's for sure not enough. If you look at different reports, it's probably $1 trillion gap that we're looking at just for scaling, hard tech innovating stuff through demo and first of a kind gaps and scale. So that's there are different reports from BCG and Elemental, Rockefeller that quantify this gap at sort of $1 trillion scale. I think there is also like another huge barrier. I mean, I would say the other like sort of trend and good news, I guess, is that your members, the large corporates, the large owner operators, I think they get more and more sophisticated in terms of like understanding decarbonization strategies, analyzing the risk, making this part of their sort of core business and seeing the opportunity. I think one way you go through that demonstration and first of a kind is for corporates to see the opportunity. Well, I don't have to calculate an IRR just on that demonstration project. I can calculate an IRR on like, maybe not a great profit on the first plant, but if I'm successful and I deploy that at scale, there's a huge economic opportunity, a huge market share. Maybe you defend your market share or you gain market share opportunity. So this only works if you can replicate, right? Like if you can calculate the return on a replication basis, not on a unit project basis. On a single project basis, it will always be very, very hard to justify. So I think, yes, the barrier is very real, but there are some signs of hope. One other thing that maybe we could talk about is like money is great, but is how you deploy money and who you give that money to is how something that we think a lot about is like how you equip these innovative companies, the startups, with the right skill set and the right mindset really to deploy capital, not just being able to paint a rosy picture of like this is the opportunity, but thinking about risk mitigation and really understanding how the tech will integrate. And I think that's a huge hurdle actually. It's yes, the money is a gap, but then you have to be able to deploy the money really wisely and not fail deploying the money. So yeah.
I mean, obviously I'm not expecting you to name a name when you're thinking that thought through, but when you think about that idea of deployment of capital in a way that is about risk mitigation, not just isn't our tech great, let's expand it, go go go, it's about the kind of mitigation piece. What might that look like? Can you kind of tell an anonymous story or something that can help us visualize that?
Yeah, there is like there are big mistakes that have been done in the past, and I think that's something that we should acknowledge. It's not the first time that we're trying to scale hard tech, and personally, I have like only 15 years of experience in this, right? Like, and I saw when I transitioned from 2009 in 2011 and 12 and 13 from the sort of end of the clean tech 1.0 era, I saw a lot of failures. There was two main sources of failure. One is keeping the demonstration scale. So, a company called Cure scaled from like pilot to first of a kind commercial, huge mistake. they saved money on the demo, but the commercial didn't work actually, or it worked but didn't provide the right yield to products and didn't perform really. And it was $150 to $200 million investment down the drain, you know, and it was probably 50% was government money. It's terrible sort of waste of capital, in my opinion. And another example is like you're successful at building, successful at operating, but it's a business strategy mistake, is targeting commodity. So a lot of, you know, in this space, a lot of innovators think if I can make this molecule, someone will buy it, ethanol, methanol. But you're competing on a very commodity market, and it's on the price. And even sustainable efficient fuel, really, you're going to compete against, you know, jet fuel, and it's not the best market. And so companies scale, they have huge plans that actually work, but the product just doesn't get the economics right. And over time, after a couple of years, just doesn't work and shut down. So, you know, there are many examples of this. I think Solazyme is a good example from a couple of years ago. And a way to mitigate this is start with added value, start with a niche product. A great example is Air Company from our portfolio. They make ethanol, and ethanol is a fuel. Oh, if I make it, someone will buy it. But they said, no, you know, it's not good enough in terms of value add. Let's make vodka. Let's make a brand that we can sell 10 times to 100 times the price of ethanol as a fuel. That's, you know, it's going to make a couple of $1 million per year, but it's still revenue. Investors love it, helps you scale through this early stage. And so I think for innovator thinking about added value first before commodity is a good example of a good strategy.
One of the things that's been interesting for me, you know, I come at this kind of investment piece, I suppose, more from having learned what industrials are doing or what they may do. And so I'm learning as I go, as I get to know, you know, how investors look at the space. But I've been finding it really interesting talking to some of the investors about how they assess things. And actually, of course, everyone's interested in the technology and what it can do. But more and more, I just keep hearing people going, look, honestly, what I'm mostly concerned about is quality and health of the leadership team, and is there a real demand pull for what these companies have? And the reason that interests me is you sort of think, well, sure, is that not a natural part of the whole thing that an early stage company is trying to do, you know, that they're going to, but I suppose if your technology is rooted in something you did for your PhD, then what you were doing at that stage was proving what was possible, not necessarily responding to a market demand. And I wonder what you make of that.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think what happens here is that a lot of, you know, folks in our space, we are technologists, like we fall in love with the technology, right? And it's like the next great thing always and the next great thing is an innovation, and usually scientific or engineering. And so you fall in love with the technology and you forget about the market. You forget about the business strategy. And that's what's happening here that's why you hear about, let's go to the fundamentals here. Is there a business? What is the business model? Who are the customers? And the team. Yeah. The team really, I think, is really, I mean, it's always important, but at the early stage, I know, you know, when a company is less than 5 people or 10 people, like really, really early, the team is really super critical for investors. And then as you scale, you can make the right hire. As you have a little bit more capital, you can, you know, hire the right people. But I think that's kind of a technologist bias, I would say.
But I guess, I mean, from what you've said about some of the alumni of the cohorts you've had, that's one of the things they get from an accelerator, in particular from UFL, is that ability to connect with the right team for growth, the right team for commercializing and fundraising, not just someone that can do this bit of science for us, you know, which is probably quite tempting as well sometimes, just to find someone to fill that seat, get them testing the thingamajig. You know, no, you need the people that are going to be able to help create that value proposition and sell it as much as create the technology and test it.
I think our thesis is even more about partnerships, and I think that's another sort of maybe mistake from innovators, that they're trying to do too much on their own and add unnecessary pieces of complexification and risk, and like just focus what is your core innovation, where you really are good at, where is your IP, and all the rest you find partner for feedstock, find partner for downstream product, find partner for the EPC, find partner for your piloting, and all these partners, they're tough to find, and they're tough to vet, and they're tough to work with, especially with large companies, because the culture is so different. So in a way, we are an accelerator for partnership. We help companies finding the right partners, and we de-risk this partnership relationship, which is tricky. And at the end of the day, it's about trust. So that's the like fundamental sort of bricks that we lay, is like, how do we build trust between human beings, and then having a framework to identify goals and work on goals, partnership goals, maybe joint development agreement, maybe product testing, maybe piloting. But this is what we try to bring, is that partnership element to scaling hard tech. It's, not one company can do it alone. Even if Amazon today wants to say, I'm gonna make jet fuel from A to Z and I'm gonna do it alone, they will need partnerships.
I just want to take this opportunity to thank our production partner and sponsor, Jano Media, for their support in delivering the Decarb Connect podcast. Over the last few years, they've helped us to facilitate great conversations that connect us with our audience, and their skills and expertise mean that we get to concentrate exclusively on generating the content, the conversations that engage, inform, and inspire. Well, let's look at then a different side of the equation, or different perspective on the whole scale-up scenario. One of the other kind of comments or areas of not exactly concern, but just something that keeps coming up a lot in our conversations with some investors, is the need for a lead investor. And we heard about this when we were validating our Tech Invest event. We hear about it at our other events, and in the membership, it's like, who's going to be the lead investor? Where's this lead investor? And I wonder, again, like, what's your perspective on that? Are you seeing anything shift in this?
I think it's a reflection of the level of risk. So when you raise capital for each sort of round, you do need a lead investors. I think it's relatively easy up to Series A, but after Series A, if you're a hard tech company and you still have a lot of technology risk, if you're making green steel, if you're making hydrogen, if you're making, CO2 to chemicals, you still have that first demonstration and that first of a kind plant. And like a VC, this round gets a little bit big, and they don't really want you to use their capital to build a plant. They want you to use their capital to fuel the growth of your company. So, the business side, but not necessarily the infrastructure. And so who wants to lead this kind of like the demonstration first of a kind? It's a reflection of the level of risk that we were discussing earlier. And it comes back to, what are the models for funding this? So we talked about sort of philanthropic catalytic capital. We talked about strategics, right? Like, so corporates who can see the long-term opportunity and have the deep pockets to actually take the risk. You might find like, sort of super round VCs, and raise like $200 million from, through a Series B, Series C, Series D. Honestly, it's not a great fit. It's very expensive capital, and it's unlikely that these equity investors are familiar with this kind of stage and deep tech. You have government, so again, like I said, and then if you're lucky, maybe you can look at debt. But again, debt is usually project finance comes a little later, right? When it's already second of a kind, third of a kind. So it's who's going to lead? I think it depends on each cases. Each startup will have to find sort of their own, and that's why I think what you're doing in September is great, right? It's like getting all these different stack in the same room and allowing the innovators to navigate them and find who's going to be the best shoe for their foot. But yeah, we can only encourage people to take more leadership in the rounds. We should talk about risk at some point and maybe ways to de-risk investment.
Yeah, let's dive into that a little bit. So, I mean, de-risking is sort of one of these words that's been hurling about in a lot of the conversations I've had this year. I don't know that I'm a whole lot wiser about really what the most, the core ways are to de-risk. So walk me through it. What do you think? What's the kind of core of this de-risking issue for you?
Yeah, I think one solution that's sort of not solution, but if you think about who in our economy and society are good at quantifying risk, it's the insurance industry. So I think that's their job, right? That's their job is to quantify a risk and provide financial not return, but like payback if what you thought was happening does not happen. So I think the role of insurance could be really interesting. There are very interesting reports. I encourage your listener to take a look at the Geneva Association. They put out 2 big reports about the role of insurance for scaling climate tech. And essentially, if we can get because I think you can evaluate risk if you have the right experts and the technology, and if you actually sit down properly, you can quantify and mitigate a lot of risks, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of resources to do it. And if you're an investor, you don't have necessarily those resources to do this. So insurance could invest in these capabilities and offer a product. You're still scaling something that is new. So by definition, it will still be risky and expensive. So I think even if insurance puts a product out there, it will still be expensive. But it could really help in terms of risk identification, quantification, and mitigation to some extent. So there are some products out there. I think new energy risk is one that I'm aware of. That is already something on the market, but I think we need just a whole lot more to guarantee performance of the technology.
Okay, well, we've sort of looked at some of those bigger, the big meaty issues that are barriers sometimes to commercialization, and certainly at the speed that many tech companies wish they could commercialize. Let's look back again at actually the core work of UFL and some of the lessons that you want to point out, both for disruptors and others that I mean, you've already identified some about those members of your cohorts who've really had either a unique product or a particular way of going about it that has been a real win for them. But what are the kind of typical lessons that you talk to disruptors about that have come out of the work that you're doing?
Yeah. I think we talked about don't try to do everything alone, and do the partners. We talked about the added value, targeting added value in the early stages of commercialization, and not try to target commodity right away. There is actually some interesting story there. When you look at other companies that have scaled like new products, like Cargill scaled polylactic acid through NatureWorks, and Braskem scaled green polyethylene from sugarcane. It took them about 10 years to go to sell the production of their first commercial plant, and that's for like a chemical that is either in the case of green pea, drop-in, so it's like polyethylene, it's the same molecule, but just more expensive. So need to find a higher value markets, need to develop uses from PE that we didn't know that find higher value. And for PLA, it's a new molecule. So you have to enter with a completely new molecule, develop new applications. So it's going to take time, and be prepared for that time, and don't be unrealistic about your time expectation. I think that's, one lesson that is always good to remember. One other one that we challenge a lot the innovators on is the cost curve. So, always the premise is like, look at solar, the cost curve fallen by a factor of 100. But the thing is, before costs fall down, unfortunately, they go up. And because we underestimate the cost of technology scale up, we first of a kind, again, it's going to cost 100 million. But 5 years later, once it's actually built, it was 200 million, right? This is the story of infrastructure approach. Even the bridge next to my place that they are building has cost overrun and delays. So if it happens for a bridge, it's going to happen for a novel technology. And so be realistic and build contingencies around cost and time. And yes, getting the cost curve down is super important to show that, how the cost will come down, but be realistic with like how actually the cost will come up before you can achieve that that cost down curve. Some other sort of proof points is everybody wants to license the technology, right? And like, I have this great tech, and I'm gonna go to Shell and license it to Shell. And but the reality is like Shell is not gonna license. It's gonna buy your license if you haven't owned and operated your tech at scale. And so you probably actually need to build and operate the first few plants, even if you want a license. So recognize that and sort of design your fundraising journey to own and operate, or at least in part, maybe through a joint venture, your first facility. Because otherwise, licensing a novel technology is a recipe for failure, because the person who licensed your tech, they don't know exactly how your tech works. And for you, it's the first time that you do it at scale. So you don't have access to the operating data. You kind of, you don't see what's happening. You have no guarantee who on the ground is actually operating the plant. So really commit to your first of a kind and own and operate. And then you can license if you wish, if you want to license. I think these are some sort of lessons.
And then there are so many accelerators and incubators that are emerging around the world at the moment to support obviously climate tech generally, but also in the decarbonisation space. If we sort of turn our attention to them, what would you say the sort of 2 or 3 lessons that you'd say to them? Look, we're successful because of these 3 things we do, or these 3 priorities. What is it that you do that means you have this amazing success rate that other people could emulate? What is it about the approach you take versus perhaps being in New York and having those connections which other people aren't going to have the same access to? What is it about the way you work with your
yeah. Well, I think from a sort of program design, if you will, it's about identifying a real problem that you're trying to solve, and not just do an accelerator to do an accelerator. So in our case, we identified that partnerships are really, really hard. They are really important and key, and they are really hard to actually get done. And so we designed the whole program around partnership acceleration, partnership de-risking. So that's our thesis, right? So I would say, find your thesis. What important problem you believe you believe in that you want to solve. If this is not clear, you're not gonna have a way to be driven and find find KPIs, and find success and define success. The other thing that sort of not a hidden recipe, but I would say for us, for C2B, what works really well is to recruit non-competitive cohorts. And so companies that can work together within the cohort, even though we want the cohort like to partner with large corporates, we find that actually a lot of value is derived from like the intra cohort, like a startup connecting with another startup, like a carbon capture startup connecting with the carbon utilization startup, right? And like suddenly, hey, actually we could maybe work together on a small demonstration value chain project. It actually happened in New York with carbon capture from buildings sent to conversion into building materials very locally, or everything in New York. One of the first, fully integrated carbon tech value chain, maybe in the world. So that's kind of exciting, and that happened, from these connections. In the end, the entrepreneurs, the journey of an entrepreneur is very lonely and it's very difficult. And it comes down to the morale and your energy and your drive to do things. And so being with other entrepreneurs in the room really helps. And when you have, when you feel down and everything, the only person you can actually call are other founders. It's not your lawyer, it's not your investor. Maybe it's your partner, at home, but maybe they don't want to hear this every day. So it's this intra-cohort sort of camaraderie has been super valuable. And it's a nice recipe of success for us.
Yeah, even in Decarb Connect's own experience of being a startup to a scale up. Obviously, we're not an engineering or technology solution provider, but I was definitely nodding vigorously when you're saying that. I think it's so easy to underestimate at the start of a journey how much that sort of informal board, whatever you want to call it, is how valuable that's really going to be, both to hold you to account, but also to be like, come on, be fair to yourself. This is hard stuff you're doing. Let's pick at it bit by bit. I think sometimes that having access to people that they're not going to do your job for you, they're not going to run your business for you, but they are going to help interrogate the way you're thinking about something and support you through that. Hugely valuable.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the C2V cohort. One of the questions I'd wanted to ask you about that was, of all of the technology types, why was that one of the ones that you really wanted to focus in on for a cohort?
Well, they're all exciting, right? I mean, you need focus. I think what's interesting in the case of sort of what we call it carbon tech or carbon management, it's the idea that we need to reduce emissions, yes, at the gigaton scale. Carbon capture, carbon conversion, carbon sequestration, carbon removal, all of these technologies share a lot of elements. So there's sort of one big family. And if you look at all the scenarios of decarbonization, we need gigaton scale for this carbon management. Yes, we need to electrify. Electrification will be a huge play, and we need to do it. That's for sure. But for industry, especially for all your members, carbon management, it's going to be a big part of their decarbonization strategy. And the other reason, which is why I'm passionate about, is the sort of the circular economy thinking. Is like, well, right now we're using oil and gas, right, to do most of the stuff around us, fuel, chemicals, materials. Which feedstock are we going to use tomorrow? Electrons? Like, we still need actual physical molecules to sit on chairs and make paints and and make fuels and so actually there was a interesting report recently, an article in Nature. How do we decarbonize a refinery? In 2050, if you want to decarbonize the feedstock of a refinery, 50% is actually CO2. It's going to be carbon, recycled carbon from CO2. And the rest is going to be maybe a little bit of biomass and maybe a little other sort of feedstock. So really the idea of carbon recycling is, if we actually want to be serious about decarbonization, is very interesting. So circular economy versus linear economy is also a nice driver for me personally to be passionate about this family of technologies.
Yeah, well, as I said to you before we started recording, and I'm sure I've said it on one of these podcasts before, I find that C2V space so fascinating. It just feels in a kind of instinctive way that it's what we will all be talking about in 20, 30, 40 years time, rather than some of the other, I'm not saying that all those pathways that we've talked about on this podcast are needed. I don't have a particular axe to grind about any one of them, but at the same time, I feel like carbon to value, which is hard, it's hard to make that cost effective or profitable, and scale up fast, but it just feels like that's a real business model. We just have to get through the cost curve, but it feels yeah, like a key part of the future. Well, look, we're going to wrap this up, but because this podcast will initially be part of a mini series, which is just for those people who have been expressing interest in our Tech Invest event in Boston from the 10th to 11th September, and then we will, don't worry, be releasing it to the general kind of podcast listeners in about a month's time as well. But you're not able to join us, rather upsettingly, in Boston, because you've decided to take your family on holiday, which seems very, very selfish. But hey ho, when you think about the lineup, and for those listening to this that are really geared towards attending that and have shown some interest, what would you have hoped to have got from it yourself, or what parts of the lineup do you think would have been bits you'd have been most excited by?
No, when you reach out about this event, I was very excited and a little bit of jealous. I'm like, we should be doing this, this is exactly what we need right now. Talking about sort of that later stage scale up funding need. And yes, I will miss it, but I have great colleagues who will be there. Ashlyn Carlson, who is the SVP of Greentown Labs, will be there. And Jessica Gross, who works with me on C2V, will be there. So yeah, I have proxies, hopefully. I think, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different aspects that I like, but you have a great lineup with key people from the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration. I think you have the COO there that's going to be there. LPO, which is the sort of after OSED, actually LPO is more like for your nth of a kind, or maybe your second and third of a kind. But really huge funder in sort of for DOE. Builder's Vision that I mentioned on that podcast, I think is will be there. Springling Capital, which is a little bit more niche, I would say. I don't know if niche is the right word, but more specialized. And they have actually a very interesting called Developer University, because they believe, again, that, deploying money is not enough. You have to sort of explain and to the innovators what is that journey from innovation to deployment is going to look like. And then another speaker I noticed that I think is doing something interesting is Chuatara Development Capital, and they sort of, it's what the name suggests, right? They provide capital for project development. And we didn't talk about this, but by the way, you want to build like a demonstration scale facility, you have to do engineering, you have to do siting, you have to do permitting. All this stuff costs millions of dollars. And like no one's to fund this because, it might be a no-go at the end of the process. So these guys are developing some clever funding around development capital, and so needed in that space. And of course, all your members, all the industrials, always exciting, challenging piece to decarbonize. So exciting challenge to solve.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. I mean, you've done a good job at profiling some of the investor side that are there. I think that the panel, which I won't be allowed to heckle because it's a panel I put together, but not heckle, but the panel I'd really love to be asking all sorts of questions to, but I will behave, is the actual tech disruptors panel, because quite a few of those people on there we've now known for 2 or 3 years. In our own growth journey, we met them early on and they've now scaled up. So I think whilst they will be clearly very proud to present where they're at, they also have a lot of stories, a lot of war stories that other people can learn from. And I think that's valuable to share, even if it's not as sexy as the polished version that you might want to present. I think that the war stories and how we got through it is just valuable.
Yeah, I think it's something we haven't discussed today, but I think it's a key pillar, right, of like how do we get better, is actually sharing past success, but also past failures and what went wrong and why it went wrong. And it's a tough thing to do, but if you can get that in the room, it would be really amazing.
Well, last question for you, and then I will release you back to your real world job and life. But when you think about, all we've discussed about in Folk, this kind of Series B plus ecosystem, all of the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead, if there was one call to action, one thing that you could get the ecosystem thinking about or collaborating on or really kind of working to solve, what is it? What's the thing that you think needs the most attention right now?
I believe it's really that transition from innovation to deployment. And so if you want to help solve that problem, we are actively looking for partners for the future of C2V to add some programming element and some partners to help build an ecosystem and a program around de-risking deployment. And that transition, especially from innovation to deployment, from pilot to demo and first of a kind. So join us, get in touch with us, and maybe there are some partnership opportunities there.
Right. Well, for anyone that wants to take Fred up on that, we'll make sure that in the show notes we include links both to connect to Fred, but also to UFL itself, and some also try and show some stories, links to some stories of alumni that have been through the programs that UFL offers. So thank you. Lovely to talk to you. And yeah,
Great.
so hope to see you in person soon.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thank you so much.
At Jano Media, we recognise that great content has the power to create impactful and positive change for lives and society. Whether that's video, live streams, photography or podcasts, partnering with us will enable you to harness the power of content to engage, inform and inspire. Reach out to us today.